Hi students, in this tutorial we're gonna go ahead and create our third Android application. So let's create a new Android Studio project. So just click on this Start a New Android Studio Project, and for the application name just type in here app number 3. Okay, and the company domain, you can specify the company domain here, the package name, the project location, and then just click on next. And here for the minimum SDK, choose API 16, Android 4.1 Jelly Bean for phone and tablets. So just click on next. And then here choose basic activity, next. So let me tell you that the differences between basic activity and empty activity is that by using the basic activity, you get the menu options for free. You can see this menu button here at the right hand side, the top right hand side here. So but by using the empty activity, you don't get this option, but you can add it later. So I prefer to choose this one here for now. Choose basic activity and then just click on next. And then you can specify the activity name, layout name, title, and the menu resource name. So you don't have to change anything here. Just click on finish. So let's wait a little bit here. So now as you can see, our project is created and still the Gradle build is running. So let's wait. Okay. So now it's actually configuring the project for us. And now the project is ready. So now let's actually go to this activity underline main.xml. So as you can see here, it is the Android view. And then inside this res folder, layout folder here, just double click on this activity underline main.xml. Select this floating action button and then press on delete key on your keyboard. Now let's go back to content underline main.xml. Select this hello world text view and then press on delete key on your keyboard. So now I want to design the user interface of this application. So first let's actually close this activity underline main.xml tab here at the top. Let's double click on this content underline main.xml. And now you can see that we have inside this componentry section, we have this relative layout. Right? Let me show you here. So this is actually a relative layout here. So let's add a linear layout vertical to this relative layout. Inside this palette section, let's search for the layouts folder. So this is the layouts folder. And let's select this linear layout vertical here and just drag it here into this relative layout here and just put it here at the center horizontal here and center vertical. So you can see these dotted lines that are actually showing us that where we can actually put our linear layout. So just put it here at the center. And now you can see that the layout width and the layout height of our linear layout vertical is actually match parent. So you can see that the orientation is vertical. This is very important. So now you know that why we have these distances here, and that's because of the padding attribute of the relative layout. Inside this text tab, you can see these attributes here, these values. So let's go back to the design tab here at the bottom. Now I want to add some text views to this layout here, to this linear layout vertical. So now let's actually scroll to the top. Inside this palette section, let's select this text view and just drag it and put it inside this linear layout vertical. So now you can see that I actually put this text view here inside this linear layout vertical, inside this componentry here. So let's select this text view, and for the layout width here, you can see that it is match parent. Let's change it to wrap content. And the layout height is also wrap content, so it is good, wrap content. And let's actually specify an ID for this text view. So the ID is going to be txt1, and then press on enter key on your keyboard. So now I want to put this text view in the center horizontal, okay? In the center horizontal of this linear layout vertical. So in order to actually change the position of this text view inside this linear layout vertical, I must change the layout gravity. Why? Because this text view is inside this linear layout vertical. And this means that this text view is actually the child of this linear layout. Or in other words, this linear layout is actually the parent of this text view. So now I want to actually change the place of this text and put it on the center horizontal of this linear layout. So let's go to view all properties section here, and let's select one of these properties and let's search for layout gravity. So just type in here layout gravity. And now this is the layout gravity attribute. Just open it. let's check this checkbox that says center horizontal. And now we can see that this text view is actually centered horizontally inside this linear layout vertical. This is very important. But we have another attribute, and that is called gravity. So let's actually find the gravity attribute. So let's see what is that. Let's scroll down here in order to find it. So here it is, the gravity attribute. And you can see, so what is this gravity attribute? We have layout gravity and we have gravity. What's the difference? The difference is that if you want to change the place of your user interface component inside the parent, you have to change the layout gravity attribute. But if you want to change the content or the child of your component, you have to change the gravity attribute. So let me give you an example. So for example, I have this text, right? I have this text view. Let's set the layout width to actually match parent for this text view. So now, as you can see, the layout width of this text view is actually match parent. Now I want to change the gravity attribute. So this is the gravity attribute, right? So I told you that the gravity is gonna specify the location or the position of the content of your component here inside the child. So you can see that this is actually the text view, which is going to be the parent, and the text inside this text view is going to be the child, right? So now when you change the gravity of your text view, it's going to change the position of the child, which is going to be the text. So here I can say center. So let's actually find the center checkbox. Let's check this checkbox that says center. If I check this checkbox now, it's going to put the text of this text view at the center. Let's check this checkbox now. And now you can see that the text of this text view is now at the center, right? And that's because of this gravity attribute. So let me actually scroll to the top here. And let's change the layout width match parent to wrap content again. So now let's find the layout gravity. And let's uncheck this checkbox, this center horizontal here. Let's uncheck it. And now, again, as you can see, it is actually on the left-hand side of this linear layout vertical, right? So let's select this linear layout vertical inside this componentry section. Let's select this linear layout vertical. And now I can actually find the gravity attribute here. So this is the gravity attribute. And if you want to search for it, just select one of these properties and just type in here gravity. Okay, and this is the gravity attribute. And now, okay, so this is the linear layout vertical, which is going to be the parent, right? The text view inside this linear layout vertical is going to be the child. So if I actually change the gravity attribute of this linear layout vertical, it is going to change the position of the child, which is this text view. So I can actually, for example, check this checkbox that says center. So now we can see that this text view is actually on the center of this linear layout vertical. Or for example, I can uncheck this checkbox again, and I can check this checkbox that says center horizontal. And now we can see that this text view is actually in the center horizontally inside this linear layout vertical. So that's the difference between linear layout, that's the difference between layout gravity and gravity. Layout gravity is going to specify the location of your user interface component according to the parent. And the gravity attribute, the gravity property, is going to specify the location or the position of the child inside that parent. Right? So we're going to actually create some more examples about that. So now, whatever text views that I am going to add to this linear layout vertical is going to be under center horizontally. Why? Because for the linear layout vertical gravity attribute, I set this center horizontal. So it's going to set the position of the children of this linear layout vertical on the center horizontal. So let's add another text view to this linear layout vertical and release it. So as you can see, the layout width is match parent. Let's change the match parent to wrap content. And now, as you can see, it is at the center. Let's actually change the ID of this text view to txt2 and then press on enter key on your keyboard. Let's add another text view to this linear layout vertical. So just select this text view and put it here inside this linear layout vertical. And now let's set the layout width to wrap content, And here, let's actually change the ID to what? TXT free. TXT free, and then press an enter key on your keyboard. So let's also change the text of these text views. So let's select this first text view, this TXT one, and let's find the text attribute, which is this one, and just type in here text one, and then press an enter key on your keyboard. Let's select this text view, this second text view, and for the text attribute, just type in here text 2, and then press an enter key on your keyboard. Let's select this third text view here, and for the text attribute, just type in here text free, and then press an enter key on your keyboard. Let's add another text view to this linear layout vertical. So just select this text view and just drag it here into this linear layout vertical. And now for the layout width here, let's pass the value wrap content. And now it is actually on the center horizontal of this linear layout vertical. Select this text view, and for the ID, let's actually pass the value txt4, and then press an enter key on your keyboard. And for the text attribute, let's set the value text4, and then press on enter key on your keyboard. Let's add another text view. So inside this widgets folder, just select this text view and put it here inside this linear layout vertical, and then release it. So for the layout width, again, let's pass the value wrap content. For the ID, let's say that this value is going to be txt5, and then press on enter key on your keyboard. And for the text attribute, just type in here text5, and then press on enter key on your keyboard. So now we have these text views, right? So now let's select all these text views. So inside this componentry section, just select one of these text views here, and you can actually hold down the command key on your keyboard. So if you are using a Windows machine, you need to actually hold down the control key on your keyboard, and then select all these text views here. And now these text views are selected, right? So now I can actually change the padding attribute of these text views. So what is the padding? The padding is actually the inner space of our component, our user interface components. So our text views does have an inner space, right? So let me show you that space. So look at this text view here. You can see this inner space on the right, on the bottom, on the left, and on the top. This is actually called the padding. Let's select all these text views again. So you can actually hold the shift key down on your keyboard and select all of them at once. And here, you can see this padding attribute here inside this properties section. Just open it. So we have this padding. We have padding bottom, padding end, padding left, right, start, top. So we have this padding for all directions, left, right, top, bottom. So for the padding for all directions, let's pass the value, for example, 10. And then press on enter key on your keyboard here. So now we can see that we have actually passed the value 10 dp for the padding attribute of all these text views, and you can see that the inner space for all directions is actually increased. So now you can see our text views here. So let's select all of these text views again. And now I want to talk about the margin attribute. So what is the margin? The margin is actually the outer space. It is the opposite of padding. So when I say margin, I mean the outer space of this actually text view. So the space that is actually outside. For example, outside of this right-hand side of this text view, outside of this top of this text view, outside of this left of this text view, and outside of this bottom of this text view. So let's select all these text views, and inside the properties section, you can see this layout margin, right? So for the layout margin, let's pass the value, for example, 15, right? And then press an enter key on your keyboard. So you can see that we have a layout margin for all directions, bottom, end, left, right, start, top. So when I say layout margin, it's gonna actually put the 15 dp, actually 15 dp for all directions, and then press an enter key on your keyboard. So now you can see that the outer space is now increased. So you can see these outer spaces, these distances between these text views here is now increased. So now I think that's enough for the design of this application. Let's go to main-activity.java file here. So as you can see, again, we have this piece of code that is related to the floating action button. We already deleted this floating action button inside our activity underline main.xml, so we don't need it now. Just delete it. Just highlight this piece of code and then press on delete key on your keyboard. And now You can see these piece of codes, these codes actually, the onCreate options menu method, this onOption item selected. I'll talk more about these later. So let's actually delete these codes that are related to the menu options menu. Just actually delete them. And we only have the main activity class and the opening and closing curly brace of this main activity class. So this is very important. And we have this onCreate method here. So the opening and closing curly brace of this onCreate method. So let's actually go straight into this onCreate method. And now I want to actually create objects of type text view. So we created these text views here inside our view. These are the objects, right? So the only thing that we need to do inside our main activity class is to just refer to these objects. So for example, this text view here, this is actually an object, right? So let's go to main activity.java file, and inside this onCreate method, first of all, I just need to refer to the name of the text view class, right? So now I need to specify the name of this variable, right? The name of this variable is going to be txt1. So as you can see, the name that I actually used for my variable is the same as the ID. You don't have to specify this name actually as the same as the ID. You can actually change it, but I prefer to name it like this, txt1. And then I put an assignment operator here, and I just put a pair of parentheses. And here, I'll talk more about casting later. Inside the parentheses, we must actually cast this object that we are going to create. Actually, we are going to refer. We must cast this object to a text view object. Otherwise, the compiler is going to think that we are referring to a view object instead of text view object. And after this parenthesis, so inside the parenthesis, you just refer to the name of the text view class in order to let the compiler know that we are actually referring to a text view object, and we are 100% sure about that. If you actually say that you are referring to a text view object and you don't actually refer to a text view object, your application is going to crash. Okay? So, and here I can just type in find view by ID r dot ID r dot ID dot what? txt1. So as you can see, we have this R class that is actually auto-generated for us, and this R class is going to have these IDs that we specified inside the content underline main.xml file. So never change the contents of this R class. You don't have to actually even change a simple piece of code inside this class, and never you should do that. This class is actually an auto-generated codes, and it's going to hold the IDs for assets and lots of other actually values. So we have this ID from this class that we actually specified inside the content underline main.xml. So if I actually click on this content underline main.xml tab, and if I select this text1, you can see that the ID is txt1, right? So let's go back to our Java codes main activity class. So txt1. So now the autocomplete feature actually helped us to choose this one and then press on, put a semicolon at the end of your statement. So what we have done here, first, we actually casted this object to a text view object in order to let the compiler know that we are actually referring to a text view object. And I said, okay, I want to refer to that object inside the view, right? Find view by ID r.id.txt1. So that's why we specified IDs inside this content underline main.xml. Otherwise, we would not be able to actually interact with this object from the Java codes. This is very important. Let's go back to our main activity class. So r.id.txt1. So in this way, we are actually referring to that object. And here we are saying that we are actually referring to a text view object. So now that we have this piece of object at the right-hand side of this assignment operator here, we are assigning that object to this txt1 variable, which is of type text view. So this txt1 is just a variable, a placeholder for holding this object on the right-hand side of this assignment operator here. Let's create another variable of type text view. So text view txt2 assignment operator, and I put a pair of parentheses. Text view, again, we need to cast this object to a text view object. Find view by ID r.id.txt2 semicolon. So we have 6 text views, I think, right? Oh no, 5. So let's actually create them here. So again, text view txt3 assignment operator, and I put a pair of parentheses. Again, I need to cast this object to a text view object. Find view by ID r.id.txt3 semicolon. Let's create another variable of type text view txt4 assignment operator. Let's cast this object to a text view object. find view by ID r.id.txt4 semicolon. So as you can see, I put a space here. It doesn't really matter if you put a space between this cast here and this value. You can actually just put it in this way. And finally, we need to actually create txt5 assignment operator. Again, we need to cast this object to a text view object. Find view by ID r.id.txt what? txt5 semicolon. So now that we have these variables that are actually referring to our text view objects inside the content underline main.xml, we can actually manipulate our text views here from our Java codes. So let's see how we can do that. So here, let's create a variable of type string. So first we must specify the data type of our variable. And now I need to specify the name of my variable. So I can say that the name is actually my string value. This is the name of the variable actually. Assignment operator, and at the right hand side of this assignment operator I can put actually two quotes, and inside the quotes I can say Android programming is fun, and then put an exclamation mark at the end, semicolon. And here I can actually say txt1, so I am going to refer to this txt1 variable that holds that holds this text view object, right? txt1 dot set text. I am calling this method set text on this txt1 object, and I can pass a value as an argument to this set text method, so that it's gonna actually show that value. It's gonna put that value on the text view one on the txt1 on the screen. So txt1 dot set text, and here I can say my string value. So I actually passed this variable that holds this string value to this method. So remember, this method needs a value of type string. We must pass a value of type string actually. Let's run our application now. Let me show you. So just select one of these devices and then just click on OK. Let me show you the emulator. So now you can see that our application is actually running on this emulator, and you can see this value, Android programming is fun. So this value is actually in place of the text one, right? So if I actually go to this content underline main.xml, you can see that the first text view is text one. So you can see this value here, Android programming is fun. So by just referring to this ID of this text one here, txt1, I could actually manipulate the text of this text one here. So txt1.setText, and we just need to pass a string value to this method. In this way, we are changing the text of the text one. Android programming is fun. So now let's actually add some more quotes here. It's really fun. So this time I am going to refer to this txt2. So I can say txt2.setText, and inside the parentheses, I want to use one of the string methods, one of the string class actually methods. So these are not going to be string class methods. This is going to be actually instance methods of the string class. So here I am going to refer to this string variable or string instance. So remember, this is actually a string literal, right? So we are assigning this string literal to this variable. So this is called a string instance actually. So here I can say, inside the parentheses, I can say my string value. So now I want to call a string method on this instance. Dot. So now, as you can see, we have lots of methods that we can call on this string object, on this string instance. For example, char at, quote point at, or lots of other methods. For example, this one, index of. So we are going to use some of them here, or last index of, as you can see here. And you can see that the data type of the parameter that this method has, for example, last index of method, and the length method, which is going to actually give you the number of characters inside that string. So let's actually choose this one, char at, and then select it and then press on enter key on your keyboard. This method is going to return a value of type char. So now I need to pass a value of type integer to this method. As you can see, if I actually hover here inside this parentheses, it says char at int. In string cannot be applied. So we must pass a value of type integer here. So I want to get the character at index, for example, 0. Right? So remember, in programming, we always count from number 0, right? So what does that mean? So look at this string literal here. Android programming, right? So if I want to count the number of characters that we have inside these codes, I must start from number 0. So the A is going to be 0, the N is going to be number 1, and the D is going to be number 2. So this means that A is inside the index 0, N is inside the index number 1, D is inside the index number 2, and so on. So when I say my string value dot char at 0, this means that give me the character at index 0 of this string literal. As you can see, I am actually referring to this variable that holds this string literal. So I am calling this method on this string literal, right? When I refer to my variable, I am actually, I want to access my value, the value of this variable. So this means that I am actually referring to that value. So char at 0 is gonna actually give us the character A. So let's run our application now and let's see what happens. Let me show you the emulator. So as you can see, our application crashed. Why? I told you why. Because this method setText needs a value of type string, and this method char at here is going to return a value that is of type char, or a character. So we must convert this returned value to a string value. So after this value here, I just need to put a plus operator, and then I can just put 2 quotes in order to actually convert this returned value to a string value. So plus operator and then quotes. So let's run our application again, and let me show you the emulator. So now you can see this A here, right? A. So the A is actually inside the index 0 of this string literal here. So you can see this value here. Let's go back to Android Studio, and now I want to actually call another method of the string class actually. So now I can just refer to the name of this txt_free this time, txt_free variable that holds this txt_free object. So txt_free dot setText, and now again I am going to refer to the name of this myStringValue variable, and this time I am going to actually use this method substring. So as you can see, we have 3 different versions of substring method. The first one only accepts 1 argument, which is going to specify the begin index. So let's actually first choose this one. The second one is going to accept 2 arguments. Let's first select this one, substring. And now you may ask that, okay, what's the difference between parameter or argument? So the parameter is going to be when we actually create that method, we say that we are actually specifying a parameter for that method, right? But the argument is going to be the actual value of that parameter of that method actually when we call that method. So these parameters or arguments are actually used interchangeably, so don't worry about that. It's the value that we pass to our method, okay? Just let's make it simple. So my string value dot substring, and I just need to pass only 1 value, which is going to be of type integer. I need to pass a value of type integer, and this substring method is going to return a value of type string. So how do I know that this method actually return a value of type string? So let me delete this method again. Let me call it again. Dot substring. So as you can see, look at this method. It says substring accepts a value of type integer. And as you can see, its parameter name is begin index, right? And it says string. So this string here means the returned type of this method. This means that this method is going to return a value of type string. So let's choose this method. And now I want to pass, for example, index number 2, right? Let's see what happens. Let's run our application and let's see what happens. Just click on run. Let me show you the emulator. So now, as you can see, our application is actually running on this emulator, and look at this value. It says Droid. So what's this? So I said, okay, the number 2 is going to be the beginning index, and I called this method. So look at this value, look at this string literal. So let's look at the index number 2. So A is index number 1, N is actually index number, A is index number 0, right? N is index number 1, and D is index number 2, and we passed index number 2 to this method, right? So you can see that the A and the N is actually eliminated, and from this starting point, from this begin index D to the end is actually on the screen, is actually outputted on the screen. Droid programming is fun. So that's it. That's what this method does. That's the job of this method. Okay? So let's actually use that method, that substring method that actually accepts 2 arguments. So here I can refer to this txt4 object, right? txt4 dot set text, and I can refer to the name of this variable, my string value dot substring. So this time I want to choose this method that actually accepts 2 arguments. So you can see these are variations between these 2 methods. So the first one accepts only 1 argument and the second one accepts 2 arguments. So look at this here. We can specify the beginning index and the end index. So what does that mean? For example, let's pass the value, for example, 5, comma, and now I need to specify the end index. So the end index is going to be, for example, okay, 9. Let's run our application now and let's see what happens. Let me show you the emulator. And now look at this value. It says ID space P. So let's find the index 5 inside this string literal. So 0 is A, N is 1, D is 2, R is actually 3, right? O is 4, and I is 5. So this is the starting index. So you can see this I here, right? And the D, we have D here. So we have also this D here. Let me show you the emulator. So we have this D, and we have this space here. And look at this one. As you can see, the end index is 9. So the I is index 5. D is index 6. The space is also a character, right? So it is going to be index number actually 7. And the P is going to be index number 8. And here, the R is going to be index number 9. Right? So we only have actually P. So we have what? We have 5, 6, 7, 8. And R is not actually outputted to the screen. Let me show you the emulator. R is not outputted to the screen. So the ending index is not going to be actually outputted. The ending index is going to be eliminated. Only the starting index actually through the ending index, but not including the ending index. So only the starting index and the characters between this range, starting index and the ending index, is going to be outputted, but not including the ending index, such as R. So if you actually look at this string literal, the character that is actually in the index, actually index number 5 is I. So let me show you the emulator. So I is printed. I is actually outputted to the console. So I is 5, D is 6, space is 7, and P is 8, right? R is 9, right? But R is not outputted to the screen. So this means that R is actually eliminated, and only ID space P. So you can see this value here. So the value that is inside of the index 9 is not outputted. It is going to be actually ignored. Only this range 5, 6, 7, 8, not including the ending index. So hopefully that makes sense. Now let's actually use another method, txt5 this time, dot set text. So now inside the parenthesis, I am going to refer to the name of this variable, my string value, dot index of, just type in here index of, and you can see different versions of this method. So look at this method. I want to actually use this method that accepts a value of type string, right? And this method returns a value of type integer. So this means that we must actually convert this value that we get from this method, which is of type integer, to a string value so that we can output this value to the screen. Otherwise, our application is going to crash. Why? Because this method, again, is going to return a value of type integer. Let's choose it and then press an enter key on your keyboard, and inside the parenthesis. Now, I need to put just 2 quotes here, and I want to get the index of a specific character that we have inside this string literal. So I want to get the index of this exclamation mark. So inside the quotes, I just put this exclamation mark here. And finally, I need to actually convert this integer value that we get from this method to a string value. So just put a plus operator and then 2 quotes. Let's run our application now, and let's see what happens. Let me show you the emulator. And now you can see that it says 26. This I here is actually in the index 26 inside this string literal. So let's count. Let's see if it is correct or not. So the A is inside the index 0, N is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have a space here, 7. This P is actually 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. We have a space here, 19, 20, 21. Again, we have another space, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. Correct. It is actually in the index 26. So by using this method, you can actually get a specific index of a specific character inside your string literal, right? We can also pass a word instead of character to this method. So for example, I can say is, right? Or I can say programming. So it's gonna actually look at this word and it's gonna go inside this string literal and it's gonna find this word inside this string literal and it's gonna give me the index of the first character of this word inside this string literal. So this P is in the index 8. Index number 8 of this string literal. So it's going to return number 8. So let's run our application now. Let me show you the emulator. So now, as you can see this value here, number 8. So it is actually in the index number 8, right? So this is how this index of a method works. And let's actually comment out this piece of code here, because I want to actually teach you some more important concepts here. So let me just comment it out. So as you can see, I actually used the multi-line comment here, /star, and I started with the /start, and then I actually ended it with the */. And finally, I am still inside this onCreate method, right? So now I am going to talk about the concept of casting. So what is casting? Casting means temporarily converting a type to another type if it is possible, right? So look at this piece of code here. Look at these examples here. We are actually saying that, okay, we are going to find the view by the ID that we pass to this method, right? For example, txt1. So it's going to actually go inside this content underline main.xml. It's going to look at the file and it's going to find the ID txt1. And here I am saying that I am 150% sure that this text view is going to be of type text view object. The view, as you can see, it says find view by ID, not find text view by ID, right? And here I am saying that I am 150% sure that the view that you are looking for is actually of type text view. That's what casting means. I am actually temporarily saying to the compiler that it is going to be of type text view, and there is no doubt about that. So now I want to actually give you some more real world examples about casting. So let me create just a one-line comment and just type in here casting, right? And here I can just type in here, for example, I can just say a byte. So this is, you know, what is this byte, right? Byte is actually an integer value, and it's gonna only hold an integer value only between the actually negative 128 and positive 127. So it is going to only actually hold a very small integer value. So this is the byte type, and I can give it a name. So for example, I can say small int value. This is my variable, which is of type byte, and I can assign a value to this variable. So here I can, for example, say number 25, right? So remember, I can only assign a number between this range, minus 128 and 127. So dot. So this range 127 positive, right? So here this byte variable only holds a value in this range. So now I want to create a variable of type integer, right? So here the name of my variable is going to be int value. So you know that int data type can hold a more larger value, right? And here I can actually cast this byte to an integer value. How? I can put a pair of parentheses and I can put integer here, and I can refer to the name of this small int value semicolon. So what happens if I don't put this casting here? Nothing. Why? Because by still is an integer value, but byte can only actually hold a very small range of values, right? But integer can hold a larger actually range of values. So I can actually cast temporarily this small int value to an integer value. So I just put a pair of parentheses and I just refer to the name of this byte variable, right? So in this way, the compiler thinks that this small int value is actually an integer value, not a byte value, but an integer value. And it's going to assign that value to this int value variable. So that's what casting means actually. Let me give you some more examples here. So now I'm going to create a variable of type float. So I can say float. And the name of my variable here is going to be float value, right? Assignment operator. And here I can assign the value, for example, number 7.8 here to this variable, right? So as you can see, this value here is of type float. And if you just put a decimal value here, the compiler thinks that you are assigning a value that is of type double. So you must explicitly let the compiler know that you mean float by just putting the character F at the end of your your value, your float value, your decimal value. So I just put the character F, and now the compiler is satisfied. The error is gone. If you don't put this F here, and now as you can see, the compiler actually is complaining, and it says, okay, we found that we must assign the value float, but we found the value double here. So just put the F here in order to satisfy the compiler. And now I want to create a variable of type integer. So here I can say int, and I can say that my number, the name of my variable is going to be my integer number, right? I put an assignment operator here, and here I want to again use casting. So I put a pair of parentheses, I put integer here, right? Because I want to assign a value of type integer to this variable, right? And now I can refer to the name of this variable, float value, semicolon. So what does this mean? Let me actually just delete this casting here. And now the compiler is showing us an error. Why? If I actually hover over this error, it says incompatible types, required int, found float. What does this mean? This means that we have a variable of type integer, so we must assign a value of type integer to this variable, right? But we assigned a value of type float to this variable. So how we can solve this problem? How we can satisfy the compiler? So here, I just need to use the casting int. I just need to cast this value to an integer value, and the compiler is now satisfied. And now this float value is temporarily, not actually for the entire life of this variable, just temporarily. It's just temporarily converted to a value of type integer. So this means it's going to actually delete this decimal value. If you cast this value to an integer value, it's going to temporarily just delete this decimal value, and it's going to assign only number 7 to this variable integer. So let me actually print these values. Let me just output these values to the screen. So here I can say txt1.setText, and now I want to output the value of this float value to the console. So here I can say float value. So because this is actually a value of type float, and this method setText needs a value of type string, I just convert it to a value of type string by just putting this plus operator and then 2 quotes. And this is also called concatenating. So you are already familiar with this concept, right? So now let's actually run our application, and let me show you the emulator. So now it says 7.8. So you can see this value. Now I want to output the value of this my integer number variable, which holds again this float value here, but we are casting it to an integer data type. So here I can say txt2.setText, and here I can say my integer number. Okay, my integer number, again because this is of type integer, I must actually convert it to a string value. So just put a plus operator, 2 quotes. Let's run our application. Let me show you the emulator. Now you can see number 7 here. The decimal value is actually eliminated here, but you can only see number 7. And that's what this casting means. And in order to let you know that it is only temporarily casted to an integer value, I am going to output this value to the console again. So txt_free.setText float value plus operator, 2 quotes. Let's run our application again. Let me show you the emulator. And now you can see that it is still 7.8, right? So that's as easy as that. That's the concept of casting in programming. So now let me give you another real world example so that this concept becomes a second nature for you, okay? So here I am going to create a variable of type float again. So float, so the data type is going to be float. And the name of my variable is going to be my float number, assignment operator. And I put a value of type float. I actually assign a value of type float to this variable. So for example, 0.7 or 0.9 semicolon. So now again, it's showing us an error. So I just need to put the F character here in order to satisfy the compiler. Let's create another variable of type float. The name is going to be, so let's change this name to my first float number. Let's change and let's give a name to this variable, my second float number, right? And now I can put an assignment operator here, and this time I can put a value, for example, 15.8 f semicolon. I actually assigned this value to this variable, my second float number. So now I am going to create a variable of type integer, int result. I put an assignment operator. So now I am going to actually assign the multiplication of these two values together. So here I can say my first float number multiplied by my second float number, semicolon. So now it's going to show us an error, and again, because these two variables are of type float here, and as you can see, the result is going to be of type float. So this variable is of type integer. So here we must again cast this value, this result, to an integer value. So in order to do that, I just put this expression inside the parentheses here. And now after this assignment operator, again, I put another pair of parentheses and I put integer here inside the parentheses. So now it's gonna actually execute this expression here first. And the result of this operation here, the result of this multiplication here, is going to be casted to an integer value, and it's going to be assigned to this result variable. So let me actually print these values to the console. So let me first just cast these codes. Let me just let me comment out these codes here, because I want to actually use the the txt here. So now I can say txt1.setText. So now I can say my first float number plus 2 quotes, right? And now I can say txt2.setText, and inside the parentheses I can refer to the name of this variable, my second float number plus 2 quotes, and finally txt3.setText. And here I am going to output the result to the screen, result plus 2 quotes. Let's run our application again. Let me show you the emulator. And you can see these values. The first float value is 3.9. The second float value is 15.8. And the result is 61. Why? Because we actually casted the result of this operation here to an integer value, and we assigned that integer value to this variable. So when you cast the result to an integer value, it's going to actually eliminate that decimal part of the value, and that's why it is only 61 here. So let me actually show you another example here. So for example, we have actually a variable, for example, int, for example, my value, assignment operator, and here I can say 2.7 multiplied by 5 semicolon. So what happens here? As you can see, the first value is of type float, but our second value is of type integer, and the result of multiplication of a float value and an integer value is going to be what? A float value. So that's why it's actually showing us an error, because the result of this operation is going to be of type float, and it's gonna actually, as you can see, it's going to be of type double. So if I actually put if, the result of this operation is going to be of type float, and float cannot be assigned to a variable of type integer. So again, we must actually put this expression inside the parentheses, and finally we can cast this result to an integer value here, and I can output this value to the console. So txt4 here dot set text my value plus 2 quotes. Let's run our application now. Let me show you the emulator. And now it says 13. And that's really great. So now we have actually another concept. So for example, we have two variables of type integer. So here I can say int first int value, assignment operator, for example, number 10, semicolon, int, let's create another variable, int second int value, assignment operator, number 20, semicolon. And now I can say int my result. So int result, actually int, the name is going to be int result. So remember, you cannot actually use the pre-used words by Android. So for example, the word int is already used by Android, and you cannot use this name in order to name your variables. So you have to use unique names that are not used by Android itself. So the name is going to be int value, right? Assignment operator. And here I can say that, for example, so now this variable is going to be of type float, and I can name this variable as a float result, float result. And okay, so the name is float result. And here I can say first int value, for example, plus or multiplied by second int value, semicolon. So now, as you can see, it doesn't show us an error, right? So that's what's the problem here, why it doesn't show us an error. Here the result of this operation is going to be of type integer, right? This means that if I actually assign, for example, number 3 to this variable, which is of type float here, it doesn't show us an error. This number 3 is actually of type integer, and I can also output this value to the console. I can say txt5.setText float result plus 2 quotes. Here I don't have to actually cast this value to a float value, this integer value to a float value. Let's see what's the problem. Let's run our application now. Let me show you the emulator. And it says 3.0. So it converted this value to a float value automatically. The Android converted this integer value that we assigned to this variable, this 3, which is of type integer. We assigned it to this variable of type float, which its name is float result. And we outputted this value to the console. So it is 3.0. So it is already actually converted to a value of type integer, this number 3 here, right? So for example, if I actually multiply first int value here multiplied by a second int value, the result is going to be of type integer, right? But when we assign it to this variable of type float, it is going to be converted to a value of type float. So it is going to have a decimal value. So let's run our application now. Let me show you the emulator. And now it says 200.0. So you can see this decimal value here. It still has a decimal value, float result. So I think that's it. That's it for this tutorial. And I taught you lots of important concepts in this tutorial. So make sure to practice on these skills, and make sure to create an application the same as mine in order to practice these skills. In fact, that's an assignment for you. So that's it. If you have any questions about the concepts that I taught you in this lesson, please post a discussion in the course, and then I'll do my best to answer all of your questions. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. And by the way, I am actually updating the course, and this app number 3 that I actually created here is the updated version of the app number 3, app 3 actually, that we have already in the course. So I'm going to update the course. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.